Dr. Pepper.
Dr. Pepper.
All right, Romans 14, 1 through 13, known as the portion is known as the weaker brother principle, stronger brother principle. Go both titles, I think. The weaker brother is the more common. I think in context, he's really dealing with people who are converted from Judaism into Christianity, who hadn't yet given up the Jewish traditions. That's primarily there. But I think its principles are very, very apropos for us today. And so anyway, verses 1 through 13, beginning in verse 1, him that is weak in the faith, receive ye, but not to doubtful disputations. For one believeth that he may eat all things, another who is weak eateth herbs. Let not him that eateth despise him that eateth not. Let not him which eateth not judge him that eateth, for God hath received him. Who art thou that judgest another man's servant? To his own master he standeth or falleth. Yea, he shall be holden up, for God is able to make him stand. One man esteemeth one day above another, another esteemeth every day alike. Let every man be fully persuaded in his own mind. He that regardeth the day, regardeth it to the Lord. And he that regardeth not the day, to the Lord he doth not regard it. He that eateth, eateth to the Lord, for he giveth God thanks, and he that eateth not to the Lord, he eateth not, and giveth God thanks. So you're off the hook for your fasting there, brother. So, which is fine. You were already off the hook with me anyway. I just like to tease you about it a little bit. Verse 7, for none of us liveth to himself, and no man dieth to himself. For whether we live unto the Lord, or whether we die unto the Lord. Whether we live, therefore, or die, we are the Lord's. For this end Christ both died and rose and revived, that he might be Lord of both the dead and the living. Why dost thou judge thy brother? Why dost thou set at naught thy brother? For we shall all stand before the judgment seat of Christ. As a matter of fact, this passage, that's a recurring theme. For it is written, as I live, saith the Lord, every knee shall bow to me, and every tongue shall confess to God. So then every one of us shall give account of himself to the Lord, to God. Let us not therefore judge one another anymore, but judge this rather, that no man put a stumbling block or an occasion to fall in his brother's way. Now, he goes on and talks a little bit more. We're going to talk about that, but this is a good spot to stop. I don't believe that's the end of the paragraph. Am I right?
You are right.
I didn't think it
Paragraph
was.
doesn't end until the end of the chapter.
That's what I was thinking, but his chapter's way too long to cover effectively, so I'm going to stop right here. We'll just do it next week. Do the rest of it next week. So, he's, as I suggest, the direct context has to do with those who are converting from Judaism, or perhaps even a paganistic system that is got some restrictive laws or something like that. And so he's dealing with them as from a weaker, stronger brother perspective. It's clear from other writings, even from the implication in this passage, that Paul is speaking of that we have liberty in Christ. You can go to 2 Corinthians 5. There's a real clear statement that where the Spirit of God is, there's liberty. So there's plenty of opportunity for Paul to talk about maturity, that you're out of one system and into the grace of Christ. And it takes a while. I'll give a personal example. Don't always do that, but I'll give you a personal example. There were some things that I used to think when I was first saved that I no longer think. I no longer believe those things. And so it takes time to get out of that. One of those was, and I remember Dean Middleton was my roommate, and we were talking one night, and I said, we're all children of God anyway, aren't we? We were talking about everybody. Well, of course, that's not an accurate statement. We're all the image of Christ. We're all people born to Him. But the reality is, we're not all His brethren. We're not all Christians. And so I no longer think that. I hope you're relieved to hear that, because I just never have. I had never really thought about it. But Dean, of course, was kind and gentle, and he corrected me, which is good. And so he also played Froggy Went A-Courtin' when it was time to go to bed. He did that every night. And I kind of got tired of Froggy Went A-Courtin'. He plays the guitar. He played Froggy Went A-Courtin'.
And now you go to bed?
And that's what he did. We would sing a few songs, we'd sing some hymns, we'd sing some newer things, we would sing just stuff like that. And then when he started playing Froggy Went A-Courtin', he was going to put his guitar up and go to bed. Now, I didn't have to, but he did. So I thought, that's the only thing I really remember about Dean. All that. So anyway, Paul is proposing that mature believers allow others to grow. First of all, he advocates believers give others room to disagree. And really, he's, again, in context, I think he's talking about the friction between a Jewish believer and a Gentile believer. I think there's some of that in this, but he advances tolerance for those still working out their issues, the differences. And, you can't learn everything in one time. As a matter of fact, except for a handful of folks, people get saved, they don't have the theological understanding. They don't have all of the tools. They're not familiar with everything. And so it takes the time. Even a very fast learner, in a few months, can learn a great deal, but they don't have everything. They don't know everything. And so there's got to be a process where you're giving them time. And that's really, I think, where he is advocating here for. And he pushes acceptance by the mature for the weaker brothers. Because usually that's what happens, is that the people that have knowledge kind of tend to, they see it and they want to do it like we do the little guys, the little kids like him. No, we can't do that. We don't do that. You might, especially if you're a mentor, you might have more involvement. But really and truthfully, even as a mentor, there's some things you just got to let them work out for themselves. So we need to remember that believers are believers, and God sees them the same as we do. Second of all, he asks respect, even though the mature have liberty. One of the things that we see here, let me see if I can locate it real quick. The word despise here, let him not despise. That's let him not despise him that eateth not, let him that eateth not judge. So there needs to be a respect for time, a respect for the person in all of those things. And so you may have some liberties, but we may need to adjust what we do so that we may be in the position to stop or not do certain things that would cause a less mature Christian to stumble, even though there's nothing wrong with it. Some used to use things like, going to movies and things. If there's a young Christian who has a concern about going to movies, you wouldn't go to a movie, at least not and lead them to do it and challenge their weakness. So they have, the reason that we do this is because they've been accepted by Christ and has been received as believers. Hey, listen, I didn't know everything when I became a believer, but Christ had accepted me, and I was in the place to do that. And others who have come to Christ, they also are young believers and need to have a certain level of acceptation. Now, we're not talking about heresy. We're not talking about wild things that are not taught. But we are talking about some things that they may need to work through. Second of all, he argues for each to maturely build their relationship with God. He's talking about worship here, esteeming days. Verse 1, one esteemeth a day above another esteemeth every day alike. It's talking about some of the things on the Jewish calendar, I think perhaps a pagan calendar. He does later on talk about meat offered to idols. We'll deal with that next few times. But the reality is, he's saying, listen, some people need to mature and allow others the opportunity. See, they need to determine for themselves when to worship God. Now, I'm not really talking about Sunday, although it is involved, because I think what he's really talking about here is Jewish Sabbath versus the Christian Sunday. I really do think that is the direct context of what he's talking about. Now, and so we have the freedom. Now, if our church is meeting on Sunday, I think that's really when we need to meet. Amen? I don't think there's really need to be, I'm going to meet on Saturday, y'all meet on Sunday. I think that there needs to be an agreement. But he's also talking about Sabbaths that of the Jewish persuasion when they had Sabbaths and things like that. I think it also applies to some who would try to get us to worship on Saturday because that's the Sabbath and so on. They have the right if they want to meet on Saturday. And then really, there's some churches that have meetings on Saturday evening, and then they have Sunday morning, and then they have Thursday instead of Wednesday. It's really just a matter of up to the group. It's not really a big deal. I'm not, Paul is saying it's not the day that matters, it's the Savior you worship. So each established what they will and won't eat to honor God. He goes through that again. Evidently that was a problem. I'm just Gentile. I like bacon. I like sausage. We still got a pretty good bit of ham from Thanksgiving. We'll probably have that for a while. That's unreal. But I like ham. I like those things. I'm going to eat it. It's not a big deal to me. But I'm not going to take a Jewish believer just converted and offer him a ham sandwich. It's just not a kosher thing to do. So each one needs to decide what honors God. And then each should live for the Lord as one accounting to God. It's really about us. What happens in this kind of a situation, and I think sometimes it happens in churches, is a pastor gets the idea that this is what he believes that righteousness looks like. And I think the most common example is dress of women. When it talks about not allowing women to wear pants. There's still a few of those churches around. And when the pastor decides for his family that that's true, he's well within what we're talking about here. But when he starts enforcing that on the church and causing some, because they don't buy into it, not to feel as welcome, that's when he's in violation of all of this. So I think there's some real need for unity on this. And I don't have any problem with anybody coming in with convictions like that. I'm good with that. Families, but as long as they don't start trying to push it on others is what we're talking about. So, letter C, the latter part. Paul comes to this point precisely for what I just mentioned, and that is he wants unity. Notice beginning in verse 9. If I can find it. Verse 9, he says, "For this end Christ both died and rose and revived, that he might be the Lord of both the dead and the living. But why dost thou judge thy brother? Or why dost thou set at naught thy brother? For we shall all stand before the judgment seat. For it is written, As I live, saith the Lord, every knee shall bow, every tongue confess to God. So every one of us will give an account. So let us not therefore judge one another, but judge that no man put a stumbling block." So there needs to be a sense of peace and unity about this. And listen, certain things just need to be left alone. Not everything we believe is, we have flaws, and we need to remember that. Number one, our salvation puts all believers under Christ's headship. We got to answer to Christ. So if a younger believer has a peculiar belief and you've explained yours and he hasn't bought into it yet and hasn't worked it all out, he's still a Christian. We need to allow him the opportunity, maybe share some scriptures, maybe do some other things. But we need to realize that even if they never come to our way of seeing things, they're still under Christ. They still belong to Jesus. They still are His. So, all faced Him to give a record, even criticism of believers. That's really what he's talking about here. He's been using this language all along, so that every one of us will give account. Verse 12, kind of a focal point. He says, let us therefore judge one another, but judge this rather, that no man make a stumbling block. We're looking at criticism here. We're talking about saying that's not right, even though, and there may be even some truth to what we say, but we need to not be critical of people, but instead we should avoid creating issues for others to fall. The word stumbling block, as Aaron has so tripping over, it means to put something that would create a place of falling or a place of tripping. It's not we used to play a game when I was a kid in the playground. You'd get mad at somebody and you get your friend, start talking to an enemy, and get your friend to get on all fours behind them, and then just sort of push into them until they back up, and then they fall over. And you could do that just to give, that's a stumbling block, something that causes another to fall. And we need to avoid creating those kinds of issues for all the others. So it we need to give others a chance to grow to maturity. The word dispute is a word that means to argue or to continually debate. It's a continuing type of concept. So we need to avoid disputing questionable beliefs of young believers. Again, we need to remember the context that this is talking about Jews mostly, though there are other concepts. Number one, fellowship on things in common that cause no disagreement. We need to hit where we agree. I can talk to a guy from the Assembly of God about our mutual love for Christ. I have friends from the Assembly of God that I can still speak to about Jesus. I don't have to necessarily correct all of their nuances about the local church, because guess what? They don't believe in the local church like we do. Not anywhere near. And, you can even talk to Southern Baptists and have a lot of fellowship with them, and then you don't have to deal with the cooperative program, for instance, or other concepts like that. So we can deal with people. Now, of course, the thing of it is, should the subject come up and you offer them a differing opinion, there's nothing wrong with that. What Paul is saying is trying to make someone change something without really having a good understanding as to why. We need to pray and allow others room to be different in service. You know what? Two opinions don't necessarily mean one's wrong. It just simply means there's two opinions. You can have two differing opinions on certain things, and it doesn't mean that one is wrong. It just means I see it differently than you do. Now, we have to agree that there's only one interpretation of the Scriptures, and that belongs to God, and that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about methodology and things of that nature. So we need to allow others room to be different and to use different methods in what they do for the Lord. They are saved by Christ. And guess what? The same Christ that saved you saved them, if they're truly saved. So we need to allow some room there. Second of all, focus on your own spiritual growth, letting God deal with them. Be an example, in other words. We need to make, number one, certain of your own positions. You notice I say biblically certain. I just took it out for lack of, it's a long word, so I just wanted it a little bit less. But make certain of your own positions without disrespect. That's really what it amounts to. And it's talking about, again, we're talking about the, for instance, he's hit about 3 times on eating one and not eating another. when we talk about the dietary laws of the Jews, it still honors God for a man to decide he's going to have the dietary laws in his life, as long as he doesn't try to force you to do what he's doing. You know, he can offer to show you why and explain to it, but really and truthfully, he can't call it unclean anymore. That's the difference. And so we need to make certain of our own position without disrespect. Second of all, honor their decisions and encourage them to serve and grow. If we had somebody here who wanted to go on a kosher diet and was okay with us eating bacon in front of him, I guess we'd just have to let him go on a kosher diet. I don't think there's a problem with that. I think both can be right. He can honor God by that same way, by the same token. The reverse is true too. He can't look at us and say, I'm superior because I have a kosher diet and you don't. Because I like him doesn't mean I don't love the Lord. And Paul is saying we need to deal with our own, not worry about it. I've got enough to worry about, I don't need somebody else. We need to promote living for Christ because we're both bought with the blood. We need to live for Christ. And there are certain things that we're not going to come together on. People make a different decision than we do. He's given us some specifics here, and I think that there's some real truth in that. If you think it's wrong to eat spinach, don't eat spinach. But don't tell me not to eat spinach, because I like spinach. But I don't think there's any spiritual blessing one way or the other with spinach, and certainly not anything like what they used to talk about with Popeye. Letter C, seek unity in spite of disagreements you may have. Listen, there are some, it's all right. It's all right. We need to have unity in spite of disagreements. There's some things we just, if it's not a cardinal doctrine, we don't need to worry about it. We don't need to pursue it. We don't need to try to make them do differently or us change our ways either. We need to treat others with respect due their calling before God. God has called them. God has used them. And I want to tell you that I came to realize this when I was sitting in the pew listening to other preachers. You know, I'd wonder why God would use that person in the pulpit and why this and why that. But God always used them. And I began to realize, you know, God doesn't use perfect people. And it was a real shock to me, but I found out it wasn't me either. I wasn't a perfect people either. And so if God has called them and they are in that position and calling, we need to respect that. We may not like everything they say. And man, when I did that, I started liking some people that I didn't like before. I started listening to people preach. And wow, they can preach. And I just need to listen. So we need to respect their calling. Second of all, we need to recognize that God's going to hold us responsible how we treat others. Whether we like it or not, we can't just push our own desires on someone else. Sometimes we want to do that. The flesh does put us in that place. And so God is going to hold us accountable for just those kinds of things. He's going to hold us accountable in terms of, and I think the best example is forgiveness. A brother asking forgiveness. And, well, I'm not going to try to go into that whole treatise, but the reality is if we're unwilling to forgive because we've been forgiven, God's going to hold us accountable. He's going to chasten us. And He's going to hold us responsible for how we treat others, how we fail to forgive. Now we watch and don't create destruction for immature ones. For folks that have a differing opinion. For folks that the decisions they make don't truly affect their spiritual life. They're not against Scripture. There's something of an area that they have some freedom. We need to let them have that freedom. We need to allow them to have that kind of thing. Okay? He's going to talk about a little bit more in verses 14 down. through 23, but this was a good stopping spot. And avoiding creating a stumbling block is a powerful and an important thing for us to remember, not to trip them up. That sometimes when you have a dispute, sometimes when you have a disagreement, when you have a problem, we can create in somebody else a spirit of rancor that we don't have to have, and it's not really important. It's just really not important. And we need to let other things go. All right? Comments or thoughts? Did you wear your steel toe boots this time?
I don't have any.
I know. Mine. I can't find anymore. What?
I love you.
I love you too. All right. All righty.